everyone. Welcome to Star OMOP Tutorials. My name is Priya Desai and I'm the Research and Development Manager for Biomedical Informatics here at Research IT at Stanford Medicine. This is part 2 of Tutorial 2. In this video, we will go over Stanford's data risk assessment and why it's important to be aware of this, especially while you're accessing patient data, and especially all in the context of the Star OMOP data. So let me start out by actually asking you guys a question. What do you think is the risk of the Star OMOP DID dataset? So you may recall that in the last video I gave you guys a definition. I explained what the Star OMOP DID dataset is. It is de-identified Stanford EHR data in the OMOP Common Data Model. What do you think is the risk level of this data set? Feel free to take a few minutes to pause the video as you think about this question. So for those of you who guessed that the risk is high, that is correct. Even though this is a de-identified data set, no matter how good your de-identification algorithm, there's always a risk of unintended PHI to leak through, especially because the Star OMOP DID dataset actually does contain clinical notes. So I just wanted to make sure that I remind everyone of some of these abbreviations. HIPAA stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996, and among other things, the HIPAA basically establishes policies and procedures for maintaining the privacy and security of individually identifiable health information, and it also outlines numerous offenses relating to healthcare, establishes civil and criminal penalties for HIPAA violations. PHI is any information that's held by a covered entity, in this case Stanford Healthcare, regarding health status, provision of healthcare, healthcare payment, anything that can be linked back to the individual. If PHI security is compromised in a healthcare breach, we have to notify all the involved parties, and failure to report such a breach can really result in disciplinary action and penalties for both you and your employer. So given that, this is how Stanford defines its data risk, and it's important to note that the data risk assessment definitions are different for each institution. So if you've actually been at Columbia or Yale and have now come to Stanford, it is not necessarily true that they both have the same data risk definitions. Stanford defines as low risk any data that is intended for public disclosure, or data where the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability of this data would have no adverse impact on Stanford's mission, safety, finances, or reputation. Moderate risk data is data that's not generally available to the public, and the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability of this data could have a mild impact on Stanford's mission, safety, finances, or reputation. High risk data is protected by law, and Stanford is required to self-report to the government and or provide notice to the individuals if this data is inappropriately accessed. And the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability of this data could have a significant adverse impact on Stanford's mission, safety, finances, and reputation. That URL can actually take you to a really nice outline of how the risk classifications are done, what they mean by each, and examples, data examples of all the risk classifications. PHI is personal personal health identifiers. There are 18 HIPAA identifiers that are defined as PHI. There are names, dates, except year. So if you just give the year, that's, so if you give just year of birth, that's not considered PHI. But, the date a certain procedure was done, that is considered PHI. Phone numbers, geographic data, so the address, in some cases zip codes, if it's a zip code where very few people live, then the zip code as well, fax numbers, social security numbers, email addresses, and so on. So these are the 18 HIPAA identifiers that have been listed here. Stanford has some minimum security requirements that have been outlined on this page. And basically the MinSec requirements are the minimum level of care necessary for Stanford's sensitive data. So Stanford does expect all its partners, consultants, and vendors to abide by this information security policies. And I really encourage you all to go ahead and just sort of browse through this page. The MinSec requirements at Stanford basically, include all those things that you probably have just gotten used to doing. The duo two-step authentication, the fact that when you actually get access to star OMOP TID data, we're going to require that you always be on full VPN. This basically allows us to have a complete audit trail of, who accesses the data, when was it accessed, how much of it was accessed, and so on. And it's all just part of Stanford's minimum security requirements. All right, so given that we know all this, what do you guys think would be the risk level of a data set which contains the SUNET IDs and grades? So yeah, take a couple of minutes and think about it. So for all those of you who guessed it was medium, that is correct. No, SUNET ID and grades are not considered high risk. They are not considered public data either, so they're not low risk, they're considered medium risk. So yeah, I already went over some of this. This is what do the MinSec requirements mean here at Stanford. So depending on whether it's low risk data, moderate risk data, or high risk data, the amount of sort of checks in place just go on increasing. For example, as I mentioned before, to access star OMOP data, you will always have to do the two-step authentication. You will have to be on full VPN, and so on. This is the last question. What do you think is the risk level of the SynPuff data? This is the data we looked at in tutorial 1. Remember, it's the synthetic de-identified data set of Medicare and Medicaid claims data. So what do you think is the risk level of this data set? The risk level actually is low, which is why we start out our tutorial with that. And as you probably realized, for tutorial 1, I mean, these tutorials are on YouTube, and I give all of you access to the STAR training GCP project. SynPuff data is low risk. I will see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at med.stanford.edu.